Hello and welcome back to Mate's Tottenham Blog and to another live stream, another Julian Nagelsmann live stream. Today we're going to be taking a look at who Tottenham's next manager could potentially be. The rumours surrounding Nagelsmann at the moment, as we had an update today from Florian Plettenberg. We'll also look at the tactics implemented by Nagelsmann at Bayern Munich and RB Leipzig, how he trusts youth, his core values and philosophies, and essentially telling you everything you need to know about the manager. As I put out on Twitter a while ago, at Mate's THFC, if you don't already follow me, I have about 2,500 words of notes in front of me, so this is bound to be fun, bound to be exciting, and hopefully educational for anyone who may not know exactly what Nagelsmann could bring to Spurs. But before we do get into that, if you are new to the channel and you want more of these manager analysis videos, looking at the other targets that we have, and also more content throughout the summer transfer window, keeping you right up to date with Tottenham's hunt for new players, please do make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and click the notification bell as well, so you get notified every time we upload or go live. But look, let's dive straight into things. And what I want to do first of all is just look at Nagelsmann history as a manager and how he's got on at the teams he's coached before. Julian Nagelsmann has been in management for 7 years without any time out of the game until now. He has held 3 managerial posts, all in the Bundesliga, with Hoffenheim, RB Leipzig and Bayern Munich. Nagelsmann started his managerial career at Hoffenheim in 2016, when he was just 28 years old. Having initially agreed to take the job at the beginning of the 2016-17 season, the youngest manager in Bundesliga history was thrown into the depths of a relegation battle in February of the previous season when his predecessor, Hub Stevens, resigned due to health problems. Hoffenheim were languishing in 17th and 7 points from safety when Nagelsmann made the step up from the under-19 setup. With 7 wins in the final 14 games of the season, Hoffenheim avoided the drop. In Nagelsmann's first full season in charge, the Kraichgauer qualified for the Champions League playoffs for the first time in their history with a 4th place finish in the Bundesliga. They were eventually beaten 6-3 by Liverpool in the playoff round. In the following season, Hoffenheim finished 3rd and qualified directly for the Champions League. Nagelsmann subsequently became the youngest manager in Champions League group stage history at 31. They only picked up 3 points in their campaign in the group stage and were eliminated from European competition. His final season in charge didn't live up to expectation, as he left after a disappointing 9th place finish. One thing his side was known for was goals. They averaged over 66 goals a season in his 3 full years, amongst the highest in Germany. Interestingly, his highest scoring season came in his last season when they finished 9th. They netted 70 goals over the season, bettered only by the top 2 of Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund. After leaving Hoffenheim at the end of the 2018-19 season, Nagelsmann soon signed a 4-year contract at RB Leipzig, where he continued to shine. He became the youngest coach to win a Champions League game with a 2-1 win away to Benfica in the group stage. He managed to bring the club to their first ever Champions League knockout phase after winning their group, which started with a 4-0 aggregate win over Jose Mourinho's Tottenham. Leipzig were eventually knocked out in the semi-final by Thomas Tuchel and PSG after overcoming Atletico Madrid in the quarter-final. Nagelsmann's time in Leipzig also saw them reach the Deutscher Pokal final, which they lost to Bayern Munich, along with 2nd and 3rd place finishes in the league. Nagelsmann's side scored 141 Bundesliga goals over his 2 years in charge, and quite a few young players benefited from the Germans' trust in youth. Dayot Upamecano, now at Bayern Munich, Ibrahim Konate at Liverpool, and other players who have made big moves to European teams such as Nordi Mukiele, Tyler Adams, Dani Olmo and Christopher Nkunku earned a lot of game time. Nagelsmann's now infamous reign at Bayern began in the summer of 2021. He replaced Hansi Flick, who had taken over at the German national team, a role Nagelsmann had been rumoured to be interested in. His first win at the helm saw them lift the DFL Super Cup with a comprehensive victory over Borussia Dortmund. Shortly after that, they recorded their biggest win in 24 years with a 12-0 triumph over Bremer SV in the first round of the Cup. Bayern went on to win the 21-22 title with a game to spare, ultimately finishing 8 points ahead of challengers Borussia Dortmund. They fell just short of 100 goals in the campaign. The Champions League campaign, however, was a disappointment. After winning all 6 group games, they were knocked out by Villarreal in the quarter-final. The season after saw Bayern win all 6 group games again, which meant Nagelsmann had equalled the record for the most consecutive Champions League group stage victories with 14. This record is still ongoing. Nagelsmann was sacked in March 2023 and replaced quickly by Thomas Tuchel. Lots has been said about the reasoning behind his dismissal, but it has not gone well for his replacement. Bayern have since been knocked out of the Deutsche Pokal and the Champions League. Nagelsmann left with a 71.4% win rate and an average points record bettered only at Bayern Munich by Pep Guardiola, Hansi Flick and Carlo Ancelotti. Now, to look at the rumours that have been linking Nagelsmann to the job, as I mentioned earlier, there has been an update from Florian Plettenberg today. But the first that we heard that Tottenham had made contact and had indeed spoken to Nagelsmann is from Dankel Patrick and Paul O'Keefe, who both stated on Twitter that Tottenham had made initial contact with the German manager. Florian Plettenberg at the time had said that Spurs had inquired for Nagelsmann, but had not yet held concrete talks. However, the big update today and the main piece of news coming out around Spurs is Plettenberg has said that Tottenham and Daniel Levy are pushing more and more for Nagelsmann. Further talks have taken place and Spurs is now a serious option for him. The German coach believes Tottenham is a big club with big potential, but again, as we've heard with every report around Nagelsmann, is that he needs to understand how much control he will have over transfers in the upcoming window and beyond, of course. So that remains something that needs to be organised between the two of them. And look, in Plettenberg's report today as well, he said that Tottenham are looking at Johannes Spors to come in potentially as the director of football, who could work well with Nagelsmann. We'll have to wait and see just how much truth there is to that one. Dankel Patrick has also said that the club insists there is no front runner for the job at the moment, although Nagelsmann, who is interested in the role, is believed to be the leading candidate. Paul O'Keefe as well said that the new manager is not close to being decided. Nagelsmann still tops the list, but Tottenham will not be afraid to move on and are speaking to others. So other managers that have been mentioned, Luis Enrique, Tottenham have made contact with, and the other main options seem to be Arne Slot, Ruben Amorim, Xabi Alonso, and of course Vincent Kompany, who's just won the championship with Burnley. Little big man Ryan with the Come On You Spurs member chat. Thank you very much, Ryan. I really do appreciate that. Good to see you in the live chat as well. Sky Sports have again reiterated that Nagelsmann is a key name under discussion and remains in the running. Mike McGrath of Telegraph Sport gave us a bit more of a negative update a few days ago when he said that Tottenham's talks with Julian Nagelsmann have hit a stumbling block over the uncertainty surrounding the sporting director role to work with the next managerial appointment. Knowing who will be leading recruitment and strategy is an important part of Nagelsmann's decision. Florian Plettenberg again saying that Nagelsmann wants to know his role in transfers, and for balance, not exactly a reliable source, but The Sun have said that Daniel Levy has reservations over Julian Nagelsmann's age, which is the only real line that I've seen that says that Tottenham have some reservations about bringing in the German. It is not a deal breaker, but equally Levy wants to make sure the new manager is respected by everyone, including Harry Kane. And as we'll get into a little later on regarding Nagelsmann's untimely exit from Bayern Munich, there did seem to be some issues with respect within the dressing room, given Nagelsmann's age. A number of the players were older than him, but what we'll do first is take a look at the tactics and what makes Nagelsmann the successful manager that he is. And I've looked at a lot of managerial and tactic videos over the last few years. My favourite one is Paulo Fonseca a couple of years ago when we nearly brought him in, but with all the managers that we've been linked to, I've looked into a lot of different ones. And Nagelsmann is the most confusing and most complicated one, mainly because, as he really says in his own words, that he doesn't have a preferred formation. He almost says that he doesn't use formations. And as we'll see, the football that he plays is very, very fluid. But it was a very, very interesting look into the different styles that is used, mainly at Leipzig and Bayern Munich, but also how fluid and how versatile those styles are themselves. We'll start with Bayern Munich. And last season, when they won the Bundesliga his first time at Bayern Munich, Nagelsmann predominantly lined up in a 4-2-3-1 formation, which kind of switched to a 3-4-3 into a 3-2-5 in possession, and then back into a 4-2-3-1 at the back. Now there were some games where they kind of started in a 3-4-2-1, but for the majority of time it was 4-2-3-1 to start with, which was different to his time at Hoffenheim and Leipzig, where he used predominantly variations of a 3-4-3 with both of those teams. But looking at Bayern in possession and how they like to build from the back and working all the way up the pitch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about it in context of what could be done at Tottenham next season. So I think the way the Bayern played in that title-winning season is probably the style that suits Tottenham's players the most. And as someone pointed out on Twitter, I do have Emerson and right back there. The reason for that is I just think Emerson suits what Nagelsmann might want to do better than Pedro Porro does. I've also put new goalkeeper, a new left centre back, and new defensive midfielder for places that we do need to improve on. But this is how Bayern didn't want to set up at the back, and what we're going to see is a system very similar to what Jose Mourinho utilised when he first came into Tottenham in the kind of lopsided back three. So it's definitely more common in German football than it is in English football at the moment. But a lot of teams in Germany like to press with two up top or play maybe with two strikers. And even though Bayern centre-backs were really, really good on the ball, it's something that Nagelsmann wanted to avoid, a 2v2 in possession, because he's a really big fan of numerical overloads and always having that extra man. Where the opposition has 2, he wants 3. Where they have 3, he wants 4. Masterchops, thank you very much for the super chat, the €12. Says, keep up the good work, Matt. Really, really do appreciate that. So yeah, what Nagelsmann did to avoid that is the players they had at Bayern, it was Alphonso Davies on the left and either Benjamin Pavard or another player whose name is eluding me at the moment on the right hand side. So what he did was he got Alphonso Davies in left back to push on and play similar to what Serge Aurier did under Jose Mourinho at Tottenham, and he had either Benjamin Pavard or Stanisic, who it was, on the right hand side, tucking in to make that 3 at the back, which gave him that numerical overload that he wanted. With those essentially three centre backs facing up against the two strikers of the opposition team, and what that gave them very, very easily was that passing route into midfield. And as we'll see a lot more as we move on, Nagelsmann likes to play very, very central, very vertically, and passing between the lines to eliminate players from the press. And even baiting them out into a press to be able to get past them. And this was the first tactic that he used to be able to progress up the pitch. And of course, the pass on to Alphonso Davies, or in Tottenham's case, Destiny Udogie, is quite often on that left-hand side. And the right midfielder of, it could have been Gnabry or Coman or Dejan Kulusevski on that right-hand side. But this is how we like to bypass that first press. Now, if you look at it kind of in taking the whole pitch into consideration, you can see things a little bit better there. You can see the 4-2-3-1 kind of starting to transition into something of a 3-3-3-1. The two midfielder, the new DM and Bentancur, what was done at Bayern sometimes was they could drop in that double pivot, or Goretzka, who it was on the left-hand side in the position of Bentancur, would play a little bit more advanced, and Joshua Kimmich or new DM would drop into a single pivot and create kind of that extra layer as they pass up the pitch to be able to progress the ball quicker. And again, as we'll touch on later, specifically Nagelsmann's time at Leipzig, he really liked to move the ball quickly and keeping their players as close together as possible to be able to move the ball as quickly as possible. So if you bring the opposition into it, setting up in a 4-4-2, you can see straight away that numerical overload in midfield, which is the number one principle, it seems, of Nagelsmann and what he wants to do on the football pitch. And you have two benefits of that overload in there. Not only do you have, of course, the extra man, but you also have that centre attacking midfielder, which for Nagelsmann was Thomas Muller, in that really, really difficult space in between the lines where it's so difficult to mark him. And if you're that two-man midfield, you can't go up and press Bentancur and the new midfielder, because you're leaving that centre attacking midfielder completely isolated. Now, if this was a three-man midfield, or if they went with one striker to press and one striker to drop back in, it could be a little bit easier to combat what Nagelsmann likes to do moving forward. But it's still not easy when they have that extra man in midfield. Moving further up the pitch, and this is where it does transition into a 3-4-3. So we have Destiny Udogie on the far side, or Alphonso Davies as it was for Bayern Munich, moving high up the pitch, and that left midfielder, this is really, really crucial, that left winger moves into that kind of green area that I've highlighted, that, as people like to call it, the half space. I know some people don't like that phrase, but moving into that space, and that causes two things really. It makes the right back have to move inside with the attacking midfielder, with the wide midfielder, to be able to patrol him to that point where he might eventually be able to pass him on to a deep lying midfielder or one of the centre backs, and it leaves the left back isolated 1v1 against the opposition out there, which we'll look at in more depth in a second, is really, really important to Nagelsmann. So, of course, really, really crucial to, again, create those overloads. As you can see in the middle, two players in between the lines, the attacking midfielder and Son, causing a lot of problems straight off the bat. Now, this is where it becomes difficult to decide how you're going to defend against this system. And for Bayern Munich last season, this proved really, really, really successful, and as well a little bit with Leipzig in the past. So the two options that the opposition team has to defend this is, one, you can defend narrow, as we have seen here. So leave your left back out with Kulusevski, leave your right midfielder out with Destiny Udogie. But those are really, really dangerous zones there, because if the ball gets out to these players,
Kulusevski a bit more deceptively quick, but Udogie, a very, very quick player, loves to take on his man. You leave them 1v1 and there's so much space in behind that these two players can get into, and with the passing range that you have with Bentancur, and hopefully the two new midfielders that we might bring in, if they're quality players on the ball, they can pick out those passes in behind, and there's a lot of space there for Spurs to exploit. So what do you do as a defensive team to contend with that? Well, you can defend a little bit wider, and you can put one of your strikers out with your right midfielder to defend Udogie, and you can put your left mid out with your left back to patrol Day and Kulusevski to double up there, which one will cut off the passing lanes from the centre-backs and the midfielders, but also an issue that Sané really, really had in the system at times. If he's out where Day and Kulusevski is, and let's say he drops the other side of that left midfielder to pick up the ball, once he turns, he's got two men facing him, and it's really, really difficult to break through there. But what you have in a centre then is another massive overload, and this, at Leipzig especially, is what Nagelsmann absolutely adored doing. He pulled everything out of the central regions of the pitch to allow people to move in there from deep. So Angelino at left back, formerly of Manchester City, absolutely loved doing that and had a very, very successful season there. And when you have versatile midfielders like Forsberg, like Danny Olmo, like Konrad Laimer, being able to move in and around those positions, come out of that midfield if they have to, but also being able to make that burst in, it's absolutely crucial. And this is where Nagelsmann wants the game to be. This is what he absolutely loves the most. Now, the other thing that right back would do, and this was more when it was Benjamin Pavard, because Stanisic liked to tuck in and right centre back. He was a former centre back. Pavard, a bit more of an attacking player. What he can do is step up into that midfield and make it a three-man midfield, and then you essentially have this 2-3-4-1 formation. And again, as you'll notice straight away, again he has that numerical overload in midfield, that extra body, which proves absolutely crucial when you're moving the ball so quickly and trying to find those spaces. Which I suppose trying to find those spaces is probably the wrong way to phrase it, but what we've seen from these teams in the last few years is instead of finding the space, they create it. And they create that by, let's say, putting Emerson in that position and drawing those two centre midfielders out. So one of them could have been patrolling that space in between Son and the new Cam. Whereas if he has to be drawn out to try and quell the pass at source, that space is created in there. And it's almost like Sarri ball from when he was at Chelsea, when they passed the ball around their box for as long as they needed to attract that press from the opposition, where they could then exploit that. That's something that Nagelsmann does love to do here as well. Now, not only could that three-man midfield, create that overload, but what it could do is give Rodrigo Bentancur a lot more freedom to push up in between Son and that centre attacking midfielder. So as you see there, it's now a bit of a 2-2-5-1. I suppose you can call it a 4-5-1, just doubling those two together. And there's three really, really serious danger zones that come in here. So first of all, three players in between the lines, extremely difficult to defend. And what you're going to find here is teams being pushed back as far as they can go, right back onto their own goal line, which some teams like to play that way, some certainly don't. But even if you do get pushed right back there, and imagine those two midfielders there, either side of Bentancur, are back on the defensive side of that line, you have Son and this new attacking midfielder in these very, very dangerous half spaces where the likes of Kevin De Bruyne has made a living. So imagine that new centre attacking midfielder gets on the ball. Son is running in from that far side into the back post, where he's not really being marked by anyone because he's in that no man's land almost. It's extremely dangerous, and it just seems for every phase of play and for every moment that the opposition can counteract what Julian Nagelsmann is trying to do, he has this idea, and he has just this simple little tweak that can change the face of everything. And that's something that I found really impressive, looking at the kind of transition from what Bayern Munich played under Hansi Flick to what they played under Nagelsmann. And I mean, if you go back a few to this slide here, what had been done under Hansi Flick was that Joshua Kimmich would drop in between the centre-backs, would drop into the right centre-back role. So imagine that new DM where Emerson is, and Emerson further out wide, which doesn't really seem like much of a change, but it was just so crucial for Bayern trying to build the ball from the back under Nagelsmann's ideas and philosophies, that instead of Kimmich dropping in, it was Emerson tucking inside. So they had that overload in the midfield, so they had the extra body in there. And there's so many little tweaks that Nagelsmann has put into this team that just show his adaptability to what he has at his disposal. Because, like we mentioned, he preferred to play a three at the back formation at Hoffenheim and Leipzig. But when he came into this Bayern Munich team, it was a team that excelled and won almost everything under Hansi Flick in that 4-2-3-1. And instead of trying to change that all up and making a completely different team, he was able to play to the strengths of what was already there and build on it and just change things ever so slightly to make it more effective and to kind of put his own mark in it as well. And like we're saying there, is that a 3-3-3-1? Is it a 4-5-1? Is it actually, what is that? Well, Nagelsmann himself was quoted as saying, "I do not prefer a formation because it is only numbers. I do not think about formations too often. It is the easiest thing to recognize and see on the pitch. But when the game starts is when things start to get weird," which I think again we can see very, very clearly here. Just to move on to the last slide that we have here, and this is what I was mentioning about with Leroy Sané in this Kulusevski position. And he struggled quite a bit when he's been doubled up on, or if he got the ball to feed. The way the left back, you only had one person to really to mark. He was really tight to Sané, and he couldn't find that space to turn. He couldn't find that ball into midfield because of the left midfielder. He was often forced back to the centre back. So what they did to counteract that was Sané would be able to drop deep to receive the ball, dragging that left back out with him and creating that space in behind. So again, typically another danger zone in behind to allow that attacking midfielder, again usually Thomas Muller, to drop in there, which again is just another example of a little problem that Nagelsmann finds a really creative and effective solution to, and Bayern had a lot of success and scored a lot of goals from this. Now, look, if you're anything like me, there's a lot of technical, tactical information being thrown around here, and very sort of specific ideas and specific situations on the football pitch that probably don't develop in every single game of football. But one thing that Nagelsmann, or that was said about Nagelsmann, or is it a Nagelsmann quote, where essentially he said that he likes to give his players these principles and these ideas on how they need to play, and instead of it seemed with Antonio Conte, in every single moment of the game there's a certain thing that he wants his players to do, and the players have to think like Conte and know what Conte wants done in that situation. With Nagelsmann, he's given them these ideas and these principles that they can then use to make that decision in the moment in the game, which I think, given that freedom and that creative expression to the players, personally is something that I love. We saw a lot of it under Pochettino, and I think you really do get the best out of players in that situation. But again, so many principles, ideas, tactics being thrown around here. The best way that it can kind of be summed up is it's a variation of positional football. And again, I've used some fantastic sources for this, which I will link all down in the description below. But it's positional football, where you can essentially break up the pitch into 5. I know at this point it looks horizontal, but the way that you're playing these 5 vertical lines, and when you're against the 4 at the back, imagine they all line up with those lines you've used to divide the pitch, and you put players in each and every position that can find a gap easily in that back 4. And by just putting players into the spaces that the opposition team doesn't want them, whether it's in these vertical lines in between the right back and the centre back, or wide of the left back, whatever it is, or if it's looking at it horizontally, putting Son in between the midfield and defence, or letting Bentancur drift into that number 10 position in between the 2 centre backs and the 2 centre midfielders. He just uses the space that is available to him on the football pitch so effectively. And it's just one of the most impressive things about the way he plays. And again, giving that freedom and that that creative expression to the players is just, it's something that he clearly values quite a lot, and that I think could fit in very well at this Spurs team. Looking a bit at his time at Leipzig. Sorry, quickly before we do, Bayern out of possession under Nagelsmann. I'm not going to go into too much depth in that, because there was nothing really special about it. It was more his kind of idea of pressing more came out in his time at Leipzig, and their utilisation of minimum width. But out of possession, Bayern pressed smart, not hard, is the way I like to put it. They'd sometimes switch to a 4-4-2 out of possession, with Muller and Lewandowski up top, to be able to just matching the 2 centre halves especially, and trying to filter them out wide, where the wide players could then press. Or what they would do is from straight away try filter them to one side. So imagine that 4-2-3-1. It goes back into a 4-5-1. If they want to filter the opposition team out left, they'll get their right midfielder to come in from the other side to kind of cut off the passing lanes from that centre back out wide, so they can filter them to whatever way they want to go, and then the midfielders step up and cut off the passing lanes. And it didn't take a whole lot of work. It was just clever. It was strategic, and it worked, as a lot of Nagelsmann tactics do. But looking at Leipzig, and again, like we mentioned earlier, it was more of a 3 at the back formation that he played there. It was either a 3-4-3 or a 3-4-2-1, depending on what way you want to look at it. And The Athletic kind of analysed what he was able to do at Leipzig. And they said he took a Ralf Rangnick team that was all about direct passing and frantic pressing and turned them into a more conventional elite possession side. Pretty impressive considering the players had been recruited to play in that Red Bull style implemented by his predecessor. And this was backed up by all the stats and all the facts. Most importantly, the pass completion rate of that Leipzig team the year before he came in was 74%, and in his 2 seasons there, it increased to 81% and 82%. And we see in his time at Leipzig a continuation of this philosophy of creating chances vertically and in the central areas of the pitch. And what they did, like I touched on a little bit earlier, was the wide forwards would stay very, very wide to create lots of space in the middle of the pitch for the midfielders. So I think Nkunku might have been on one side, and I say Dani Olmo on the other side, although he might have played a bit more centrally. They'd leave that space in the middle. So sometimes they might pull wide, but sometimes they might go right up on the defensive line and make it basically a 3 up top with Timo Werner in the middle and leave that big space in the middle of the pitch. And what would happen then is you have Angelino at left back. You have, I think Klosterman might have played at right back for a while there. But whoever it was, this big gap in the pitch, when they see that moment where maybe the right centre-back is too focused on Nkunku inside him, or maybe the opposition centre midfielder is following Dani Olmo back into a deeper position, they make that burst into the space that is left like that, and they had the passing range in that team to be able to pick out players. So with Leipzig, I think it more depended on very, very strong technical ability, I suppose, and the fullbacks knowing that moment. And as I said earlier, with the way that Nagelsmann played at Bayern Munich, I think Emerson Royal kind of fits that style better if that's what he's going to do at Spurs. But if it goes back to what he did at Leipzig, Pedro Porro is definitely more suited to that, in that more attacking position. And I prefer the Bayern style, but I also really want to see Pedro Porro succeed at Spurs. So I'm a bit torn at what might be the best. And on that style I was mentioning with the with those wing backs bursting into the space, the added width that they brought to the game caused a dilemma for opposition defences. And again, like mentioned before, if you defend wide, you're leaving space in the middle of the pitch. But if you defend narrow, you're leaving your wing backs exposed 1v1 on the outside. But looking at the pressing at Leipzig, which like I said was much more intense, I suppose, than what was done at Bayern, especially when they were adapting to life without Werner. And again, another fantastic example of how Nagelsmann is able to adapt to what he does have in that squad. Is a lot changed when they got rid of Timo Werner. So to make up for the lack of pace they had up top when he made that move to Chelsea, what he decided to do was win the ball higher up the pitch, so that lack of pace wouldn't really matter, because you're not breaking 50-60 yards where a player having an extra 5 yards of pace can make a massive difference. He wanted to win that ball higher up the pitch so they could rely more on the technical creativity of players like Dani Olmo and Emil Forsberg, which, that creativity is there in abundance. They also adapted from a quick attacking style to a more possession-based game. It's kind of just a continuation from that change that he made when he took over from Ralf Rangnick. They averaged 392 passes per game in that first season with Timo Werner, which increased massively to 552 passes per game without Werner. So really, really more possession-based and trying to pick the lock rather than smash through the door. Their passes were quick and intricate to dislodge opposition defences, which worked particularly well against low blocks, which Tottenham fans will be excited to hear about, because we've struggled against low blocks even back into Pochettino's time. And something they use for this is what's called minimum width. Now, I'd never heard of this before, and I had to research it before we came on here. But the idea of minimum width essentially is this. So I have at the top is maximum width, and the bottom is minimum width, and the bottom is what Nagelsmann like to do more at Leipzig. So minimum width essentially means the right-sided midfielder, which is Dejan Kulusevski, comes in as narrow as possible while still being the widest player in the pitch. So it all depends on where that left back is playing or left wing back. You come in as narrow as you possibly can while still being outside him. Now, what this does, it does a couple of things really. So the first thing is that you're a lot closer to your teammates. So that quick, intricate passing. I saw a clip that the Bundesliga put out in an analysis of Julian Nagelsmann. I think it was Dani Olmo and Christopher Nkunku were passing the ball back and forth, and each of them took less than a second in possession, and they were able to bypass 3 players just by doing that. So with this minimum width, you're a lot closer to that cam, you're a lot closer to Rodrigo Bentancur, so you can move the ball quicker. Your movement off the ball doesn't have to be as severe. You can just maybe drink the other side of the defender, and it just creates a bit more confusion, and it makes it a bit easier to dislodge the players in the position. Another benefit is if you're out of possession, if you lose possession, imagine Kulusevski tries to play a pass into the cam there and it's intercepted. Well, all of a sudden there are three players right on top of that player already ready to go. That gegenpress style from Ralf Rangnick, where they can win the ball back high off the pitch again and start again. Now you look at that in contrast to what you see at the top there. If Udogie tries to play the ball to Son and then Son plays it back and it's back to Udogie, it's gone back and forth and it's taken a bit too long. The passing length is longer, which means it will take longer in time. And as well, if a bad pass is played there, that right back could break in between Udogie and Son and be up the pitch straight away. So there's a few kind of small little benefits, but also if you're trying to counter-attack, there are a few benefits in that as well. If I can press the right button, there we go. So if you win the ball back deeper in the pitch, as Romero does there, if you want to play that ball to Destiny Udogie, he picks it up really, really wide. That defender has time to come out and meet him. The opposition team has time to come back and kind of get into position as Udogie's picking up the ball and driving towards the box. Where if you play that ball to Kulusevski, straight away he's right on his man. He can cut in on that left foot and he can shoot. You're just much closer to goal and you're much closer to being in a dangerous position, I suppose, and just causing problems for that opposition team. So that's a very, very basic look at that kind of minimum width that Nagelsmann like to use at Leipzig. But I think that's the most simple I can put it. And Danny Olmo actually had a fantastic quote where he described exactly why they use that philosophy. And he said, "Here we play closer together. We rely on each other so we can give the game more speed. If we play more spaced out, we can't play as fast as the coach wants us to. That's why we want to play as close together as possible, almost like five-a-side football. The smaller the space, the better, because the ball moves faster. We attract more rivals that way, again, trying to bait out the opposition to create that space. But we need to know how to play under pressure. If we succeed, we open bigger spaces and we're able to attack with more depth." Now, don't tell Antonio Conte, but Tottenham would need to play under pressure if they wanted to operate with this style. But with some technical players added into that midfield, I think it's something that will be worth trying with the likes of Kane, Son, Kulusevski, Bentancur, and again, maybe a few more players coming in. Red Hill, the YouTube notifications are all over the place. I apologize if you didn't get a notification, but the platform is all over the place with notifications for some reason. But looking into philosophies, and this is one thing that people really wanted me to speak about when I put out a tweet, the core values and philosophies that Nagelsmann has. And one of the most basic and most simple one really, Tom Hamilton of the ESPN did a feature piece with Nagelsmann back in 2020. And he said, "Nagelsmann is renowned for his adventurous use of new age technology. At Hoffenheim, he installed a massive screen on the training pitch so they could do real-time analysis. He brought in drones. He also used to do something called the Footbonaut, a machine geared toward improving a player's reaction time and spatial awareness. But his coaching philosophy and approach comes down to two fundamental pillars: efficiency on the field and a personable approach off it. He sees his role as 30% tactics and 70% social competence." That's a direct quote from Nagelsmann. He sees his role as 70% social competence, which is 70% more than Nuno Espirito Santo had. But that use of technology is, I think, really interesting because, I work for a data collection sports technology company, and it's crazy to see how quickly the kind of quickly everything is going towards that side of things. Everything needs technology. You can't do anything as a manager or as a coach or as a player or as a pundit or as anything without having a lot of technology. And I think exploring new technologies and finding the boundaries that you can bring that stuff to in the modern game could be crucial. It could be the difference between 5th and 4th. It could be the difference between an FA Cup semi-final or lifting the FA Cup, because it just gives you that extra edge. And I'd love to have a manager come in and be like that, because I think a lot of our recent managers have been kind of old-fashioned, old school, get on the pitch, try your hardest, and what happens. But Nagelsmann is certainly very, very different to that. Back to what I was saying there, sorry, about the kind of social competence and all that. Nagelsmann said, "At this level, the quality of the players at your disposal will ensure that you play with a good tactical setup if the psychological condition is right." So I think what he's essentially saying is, when you're a top team in Europe, whether he's with Leipzig or Bayern, or again, as much as we're not at the moment, Spurs are a top team in Europe, you will play with a good tactical setup, but the psychological condition needs to be right for that to happen. And Nagelsmann, is someone who was big into the psychology side of sports. He was a player. A few people have asked why he retired so early. He retired because he had a couple of knee injuries. When he was with Augsburg, he retired at, I think, 20 or 22, so he was extremely young when he had to bring his career to an end. And he went to college and he did a sports management, sports business and sports psychology type of course. So he really, really does know what he's talking about in that regard. And the Athletic said he is often mischaracterized as primarily a tactical manager, and he is doubtlessly innovative and dynamic in that sense, but he places more emphasis on the psychological aspects of coaching, which I think the Spurs team needs at the moment. If you ask me, Conte coming out and criticizing them in every press conference, Jose Mourinho and his kind of brash, abrasive manner that we all know too well about, and Nuno Espirito Santo, who just seemed to be so distant and almost absent with the players like that. I think it could be great to have a manager who really, really does care about that aspect of his coaching. Looking more at his coaching kind of footballing philosophy, Tom Hamilton in this piece said his coaching philosophy stems partly from those managers he has worked under, like Thomas Tuchel, who he played under at Augsburg, but also his managerial hero Pep Guardiola, and then from the grandfather of gegenpressing, Ralf Rangnick. He was Nagelsmann's predecessor at Leipzig and also coached at Hoffenheim from 2006 to 2011. At Leipzig, Rangnick took charge for the 2018-19 campaign, so the club could wait to bring in their long-term dream manager, Nagelsmann. So they were planning that move for a year before it happened, and they gave Rangnick their own, essentially as a stopgap, because they really wanted Nagelsmann to come in. One extremely prevalent topic at the moment in women's football especially, but in men's football too, is the kind of hectic calendar. And look, we've all listened to Jurgen Klopp moaning a little too much about it, but again, a little bit of an inconvenience. Nagelsmann had a solution. He says, if you imagine we play every 3 days, you cannot work at that level every day. So we need time when the ball is at your feet, creating chances through ball possession. So very cliche, but letting the ball do the work. I tried to find a good balance between all the phases while also trying to develop new things. And that's where that minimum width into gegenpress kind of comes into play. You are pressing really intensely. You are pressing when you lose the ball. But since you're already so close to the player who you're losing the ball to, it doesn't take as much effort. And you're working smart, not working hard. Something that Nagelsmann loves. This is a quote I was telling you about a few seconds ago. He said, I give my players patterns that apply to every basic structure and every phase of play. It's important that my players put the principles we have into practice on the pitch at the weekend and then switch them to suit the respective opponent. This makes us less predictable. So he wants to give that trust to his players. He wants to give that freedom to his players to be able to do what they think needs to be done on the pitch. They have their principles and their guidelines for all the world that they need to follow, but they're the ones who can make that decision, and they're the ones who can be the creative kind of outlet on the pitch. And switching what they're doing to suit the respective opponent. I need to see that again at Spurs, because we've been way too stubborn and way too kind of one-dimensional with the last couple of managers. This is the way we play. If it works against this team, fantastic, but quite often it doesn't, and we kind of didn't have a plan B to be able to adapt to what the opposition was doing, with the exception of the way Ryan Mason utilised Dyer in a few games this season. One final quote from Nagelsmann. He says, if they love to go to training, then they will develop a bit better, rather than they come into the training pitch and think, oh no, I have to meet the manager again, and that he is a crazy guy. The social part is very important, but at the end it is also getting the idea of how they want to play soccer. You've got to find a good balance and have a good relationship with your players while still trying to improve them in all things soccer and what you will see on the pitch, which I think that quote sums up everything that Julian Nagelsmann is about as a manager. Which I think leads us nicely actually into his departure from Bayern Munich, because this is something that no one was really expecting. You know, they were already won the Super Cup this season. They were fighting for the Champions League, for the Bundesliga title, and still in the Deutsche Pokal. And off the back of Tottenham sacking Antonio Conte, as it turns out, in a matter of days, Nagelsmann, who was on holiday in Austria, was sacked from by Bayern Munich. At the time, they were 1 point behind Borussia Dortmund in the Bundesliga table, but still very much the favourites to go on and lift that trophy. And Nagelsmann found out during a skiing holiday in Austria on social media, probably from Fabrizio Romano's tweet, that the sacking was imminent. And the board reportedly made the Jason. I don't know if he says soccer. It's from ESPN, which is an American outlet. So maybe. It could have been he said Fußball in German and they translated like that. I'm not entirely sure. But soccer's fine. Now the board reportedly made the decision to sack Nagelsmann because they felt the quadruple was under threat. Again, having already won the Super Cup, they were still fighting on the other three fronts. But it seems as though the team was too inconsistent for them. The results weren't they weren't putting together long runs of wins or whatever. And for whatever reason, they made that decision to sack him. Now, since that has happened, Thomas Tuchel came in from his time off after being sacked by Chelsea. He's since been knocked out of the Champions League by Manchester City and the Deutsche Pokal by Freiburg in what was an embarrassing defeat at home. Another jarring stat is that Nagelsmann had lost 3 games from August to March. Since March to now the 5th of May, Tuchel has already lost 3 games, 2 of which were the games that got them knocked out of the cup competitions. You can always look at a manager, the improvement that a team makes when he is in charge. But I think a really, really big factor of how good a manager has done at a team is how they go afterwards. So look at Graham Potter at Brighton, who did a fantastic job, but they've been even better since De Zerbi came in. Whereas with Bayern, after losing Nagelsmann, form has dropped massively. I think they're still only 1 point behind Borussia Dortmund, but their season in the cups is essentially over. So you look at why Nagelsmann was sacked, and Oliver Kahn, the CEO of Bayern Munich, who apparently is on the chopping block as well, said the quality of our squad has shown less and less often. So again, talking about the consistency. Since January, we played less and less successfully and attractively. Strong fluctuations in performance put our goals in danger this season, but also beyond this season. So we reacted. Hasan Salihamidzic, who's the director at Bayern Munich, said, of course there were problems and we had a few discipline issues. Julian Nagelsmann is a very good coach, but we had a few problems. So it was interesting. There was no real rumours and no chatter that Nagelsmann had been causing disciplinary issues at the club, but that's what Salihamidzic had to say as one of the reasons that they let him go. Now, looking at what some journalists have said, Fabrizio Romano said that some players did want to change. He infamously didn't get on very well with Manuel Neuer and Thomas Muller, who are some of the more senior figures in that Bayern dressing room. So once you don't have them, I think there's only one way that things are really heading. And Romano also said that Bayern had wanted Tuchel for a very, very long time and felt they needed to act quickly. After Tottenham sacked Antonio Conte, Tuchel was apparently top of our list. So Bayern saw what was going on there and thought if they wanted to get Tuchel in, if they wanted to, and they didn't want to risk missing out on him for another couple of years, they had to act immediately. And also with Ancelotti's future at Real Madrid in doubt, he was rumoured to be on the way to the jersey I'm wearing right now, the Brazil national team. So Bayern just bit the bullet and made that change. Valentino Masseri from Bild said that as a young coach, Nagelsmann struggled to deal with the big stars in the dressing room, and it's also believed that his tactics were too complicated, which is quite ironic given that in that 2020 piece with ESPN, Nagelsmann said, it is important that sometimes in training they are overloaded with information so they can improve. It is one of my ideas to do it like this, and at the end players develop how I want them to develop. So he saw as this overload of information, something was going to stick, but it seems as though some players in that Bayern dressing room thought there was just too much tactics, too much everything being thrown at them really, which they couldn't deal with. Raphael Honigstein of the Athletic said that this wasn't a clear-cut situation of him losing the dressing room like it was with Carlo Ancelotti or before him Niko Kovac. It's just the unfortunate thing that the board seemed to think he didn't get the most out of the team, and while that isn't a really failure, it's also not success, especially when you're Bayern Munich. Now there were some other reports that suggested Nagelsmann wasn't mature enough for the board, that he used to arrive to training on an electric scooter and he went around the city on a motorbike. I have a feeling that's not why they sacked him. But again, in that 2020 piece, the author said that Nagelsmann owns 2 skateboards, loves drones, and is young enough to understand his players' own 2020 vernacular. So you can look at the positives and the negatives of that. But I think the fact remains that there doesn't seem to be a solid reason why Bayern let him go. It could have just been unfortunate timing that Thomas Tuchel was available and Bayern needed to snap him up while they could. But one thing that Nagelsmann did very well there, and that is other teams, which is something a lot of people wanted me to look into, and that was his development of young players. And Nagelsmann is widely regarded as a fantastic manager for developing young players, for giving them an opportunity and turning them into superstars. And it's something he's spoken about a little bit as well, where he said that as a young manager, he knows how important it can be for his career and for his development to be able to be given the opportunity at a high level at a very young age, and he wants to almost pass that favour on and give that same opportunity to players. And Looking at some young players that he's handed debuts to at his few clubs, there's Matthias Tell, who's I think 19 appearances and 4 goals for Bayern Munich this season. You've Reiss Nelson, who was loaned in at Hoffenheim, Ethan Ampadu, who we've seen in the Premier League, Justin Kluivert, Dani Olmo, a very, very important player in that Spanish national team, and Christopher Nkunku as well, who is on his way to Chelsea at the end of this season. Reiss Nelson, who was loaned to Hoffenheim from Arsenal when Nagelsmann was there, said that Julian's a great manager and he's got belief in young players, so it's a good place for me to go and play. And Christopher Nkunku, who signed with Leipzig from PSG when Nagelsmann was in charge, said that Thomas Tuchel used to ask a lot of me, but I didn't have enough time to do what he asked. Julian Nagelsmann also expects a lot from me, and he's demanding about what I do in training and games. That's taken me further. He also talks a lot about tactics. So some praise from those young players that Nagelsmann has helped out in the way he's dealt with them. And to look at the numbers, in his 7 years of management at his 3 teams, Nagelsmann has handed debuts to 16 players aged under 20, including 5 players under 18 at Bayern Munich, which, when you think about it, is a crazy, crazy stat. There's 4 17-year-olds in there and 1 18-year-old that has been given their Bayern debut by Nagelsmann. And after securing the Bundesliga title early last season, Nagelsmann, in his post-game interview, said immediately that he wanted to use the rest of the season to give opportunities to these young players and get them experience on the pitch in the Bundesliga. And it's an exciting thing to see if Nagelsmann does come into Spurs now. We've won the Under-17 Premier League Cup a few weeks ago, and last night we won the Under-18 Premier League Cup. There's some fantastic young talent there. There's Maxime Pascozzi, who's a very versatile defender who could work really well under what Nagelsmann demands of his defenders, but also Jamie Donnelly, Tyrese Hall, Alfie Dorrington, Mikey Moore, Oliver Iro as well. There's so many exciting young players in there that Callum Olasesi as well in midfield that could really, really benefit from working with Nagelsmann, especially again given how the previous managers didn't seem to give any opportunity to young players. And what I did next was I looked into Nagelsmann's transfer history, which tied in actually quite well with the youth development, because the vast majority of signings that he makes are young players, and players that he can bring in for relatively cheap and develop. Now, of course, that wasn't always the case at Bayern Munich. So we look at that in a bit more detail shortly, but we got a bit of an insight into what Nagelsmann likes of a new signing and what he looks for in players, because when he signed Nkunku at Leipzig, he was quoted as saying about the player that he's versatile and has real quality in attacking one-on-ones. He also fits perfectly with our transfer DNA, and as a young player with great potential who can take steps forward, he's just like us as a club. So he wants those players who are coming in young, willing to improve, already has those kind of raw talents and just needs to be fine-tuned, I suppose. And for only £13 million, I think Nkunku was a brilliant signing for him there. Now, he signed a lot of young players who've gone on to great things. There was Dani Olmo, who's 21 when he was brought into RB Leipzig for €29 million, and that's probably one of the higher end signings that he made. Dani Olmo did fantastically with Dinamo Zagreb in the over in Eastern Europe. Nagelsmann brought in Dominik Szoboszlai for €22 million when he was just 19, and he's gone on to be an incredibly good player, having a bit of a blip in his form in the last year or two, but a fantastic talent nonetheless. Now, I do want to say as well, it is worth mentioning that at Leipzig there was a fantastic structure, the Red Bull structure, an entire scouting structure from top to bottom that really helped there, but there's still players that Nagelsmann was able to get into the team and get the most out of. Matthias Tell, who we mentioned a while ago, signed at 18 for Bayern Munich under Nagelsmann. He's made 19 appearances with 4 goals this season. He brought in Josko Vardiol when he was just 19. Spurs fans know him all too well, as would any Chelsea fans. Just 18 million they spent on him. There's Nkunku, who I mentioned, brought in for 13 million, and a few free signings as well. Nadim Amiri, who Nagelsmann brought to Hoffenheim when he was just 15, is now over 200 Bundesliga appearances for Hoffenheim and Bayer Leverkusen, so we really saw that talent very young. Grisha Promel, another free transfer brought in. We also signed Florian Grilic and Omar Richards from Reading on free transfers. In his entire managerial career, Nagelsmann has only ever made 3 signings over €20 million, all at Bayern Munich. They're Matthijs de Ligt, Dayot Upamecano and Sadio Mane. Every other transfer has been a very affordable player, and look, we're going to say it, Tottenham don't seem to spend big money well, but a lot of our more astute signings have been come from players in that 10, 20, 30 million pound region, like Kulusevski, like Rodrigo Bentancur, and even back a bit further with Heung-min Son and what he's become for the football club. So it's good to see that Nagelsmann doesn't exactly need the big money to get the players that he needs into the team. Looking back at that time at Hoffenheim, he brought them from the brink of relegation to back-to-back Champions League appearances. And his most expensive time there was Andre Kramaric for €11 million. In his first season, he made 10 million profit. In his second season, he made 30 million profit. In his third and final season, there was a €28 million net spend there, but he's still, banking a 12 million profit for that club over 3.5 years, bringing them from essentially surefire relegation to the Champions League group stage. His net spend at RB Leipzig as well as €20 million, but I think a key thing there was he was really, really able to replace big players that left, like Timo Werner, as you mentioned, not exactly replacing him with personnel, but replacing him with a change in style, which has worked so well for them. Bill, thank you very much for subscribing. But look, that's my analysis. My opinion is that Nagelsmann has to be the number one choice for Tottenham. He has to be the man that we put everything on the table for. If we need to pay Bayern Munich compensation, if we need to pay him compensation, if we need to get Ralf Rangnick in as the director of football, or Johannes Spors, he could be, he could work well with Nagelsmann as well, from what I've read today. Tottenham need to go all out and get this man, because the route that we've gone down in recent years with the win now managers, it's just not going to work. And Nagelsmann could be this incredible sort of balance between the win now managers and the kind of young, not unheard of, but up and coming managers like Ruben Amorim or De Zerbi, where Nagelsmann, he is still young, but he also has a lot of experience. He was at Bayern for I think about 1.5 years, coming up to 2 years, Cantab. So he's 7 years experience at 35. So he does tick both of those boxes that we're looking for, and he has that experience of being in a dressing room with a lot of stars and being really, really in the limelight with that Bayern media and having to achieve every single time he goes out in the football pitch. For me, he's the number one option. I can't see myself being excited about any other manager that we might bring in, but look, I hope everyone who has watched, anyone who's watching on the replay, that you have learned something in this about Nagelsmann, that you have maybe a more informed opinion about whether or not you want him at the helm for Tottenham. If you have enjoyed it, please do make sure to give it a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We've had a few new subscribers on the stream, which is always brilliant. We've had over 1,000 of you joining to watch live, and we're just short of 100 likes. So please, if we can get it over that mark, that would be massively appreciated. And do make sure to go over and follow me on Twitter as well, a bit more frequent on the updates there at MattHayesTHFC. It's also linked in the description down below. But look, from me for now, and as always, thank you so much for watching.